Welcome back to SemiUIs with Replicant. Today we're improving our development setup and doing some refactoring. The first thing we'll do is to add Dataspex, which will allow us to inspect the application state at any time. So I'll just copy this dependency and paste it into our dev dependencies. And then we'll grab this require and we'll put this into dev namespace because we don't want to run this in production. And then we'll just run this Dataspex inspect call, and that's pretty much it. Let's take a look and see what it looks like. So here's the app. Over here is Dataspex. You have to install the browser plugin for this to work. And there we go. Now we can see the contents of the application state at any time. And yeah, here you can see the timer ticking. And immediately after adding this extension, I became aware of something that a viewer actually commented on earlier. And that is that the timer just keeps going because there's no unload actions to stop the timer when you leave the view. Next up, we're going to be adding Nexus, which is another library that I released last year. And Nexus implements effects and actions and interpolations very similarly to how we implemented them ourselves in this app. And while it was instructive to do so by hand, we can now leverage a library to do it for us so we can remove some code. So we'll start with these effects. They need to live in the Nexus effects map. And each effect is now a function that will receive a context of sort, our system, and any arguments pertinent to each effect. So for this association, it's not going to use the context, and the system will be the store, and then we can just destructure the arguments directly, so we don't have to use apply. Path and value. And then for schedule, so we can destructure these arguments directly again. Raise that one, and then it does handle actions, which is actually an asynchronous dispatch of more actions. And the context object has a dispatch function in it that we can use for this. So there we go. Those were the effects. Next up, we have the actions, and they're implemented inside the counter namespace, the temperature namespace, and the timer namespace. And then we have this weird little translation going on here from action to effect. This is not necessary in Nexus. You can just dispatch effects directly. So to make this change easier to make later on, we'll start now by just removing the use of this action association. There we go. That should be enough. Now we only have effect association. We can remove this later. Now for each of these namespace specific actions, we'll just add a map with the action and use the Nexus style signature, which is a function that receives state and any arguments you pass to the action, and then it can return a new list of actions. And those go into the Nexus actions map. There's just the counter actions. And then next up, we have the temperature, which has one action as well, called set temperature. It's a function, takes state again, and any arguments. So what would you call this? Temps, I guess. Temps, and then we can call set temperature with temps. We don't need the state. And then we can go on and merge them onto the counter actions. Next up, we have the timer, which also has one action. We'll define a map for that as well. Tick. Yeah, it's just going to return here. Once again, it uses a state, and it expects to find now and state, which we have to make sure is the case. We'll add the actions here, and then we'll have to tell Nexus how to produce a state from the system to begin with. And you do that with Nexus/system to state. And that's a function that receives the system, which in our case is the store. We can deref it, and then we can assoc now so that it always has a fresh now when the action is dispatched. Those were the actions. Next up, we have the interpolations that go in this map as well. So we do Nexus interpolations, and these are also going to be functions that will allow them to nest, which I'll show you in a little bit. Let's just get the function in place first. It will receive a single argument that contains what's called dispatch data, and that's how you can grab the event. So it's going to look like that. And the now interpolation doesn't have any arguments, so we can just scooch that argument. Okay, that's most of it. Let's find the call to this function. That's the handle actions down here. We can replace those with Nexus. We have to require it first, of course. Nexus/dispatch, pass in the Nexus system and then the apps system, which is our case. Once again, it's the store. And then the dispatch data, which is a map of whatever data you have available at dispatch. It's just going to be the DOM event. But this is how you can make data available to actions that are only available at the time of dispatch. Then we have the event data, which is better named as actions, which is what it is. And then we'll do exactly the same thing on trigger onload, except when that happens, we don't have any dispatch data. With those changes, our app should now be working still, which it is for the most part, but some things are not working. And that is the interpolations. The reason for that is that interpolations in Nexus need to be wrapped in a vector because they can receive arguments. So let's just go over and fix those. We'll put a vector around here because you can put an argument in here, and I'll show you why that's useful later. We just have to go through all these to make this change. So the definition, we don't want to change that, but the rest of these we want to change. I could have used the edit mode, but that doesn't give me a pair edit, so I'm going to do this by hand instead. There are not too many of those. Fix the test as well. Should probably run the test at some point. Should be working. No, still not working. Why is that? The tests are passing. So the problem is that it's not called interpolations in Nexus. It's actually called Nexus placeholders, because that's what they are. There we go. Now things should be working better. Yes, flights can change dates and things are fine. Actually, these value as, we have 3 placeholders that catch the value and do different things with them. So let's instead see how we can nest placeholders to do this in a more efficient manner. A placeholder can take any number of arguments, and then you can do further processing with them. So in this case, we're going to do parse long with the number. And for the keyword, we're just going to do some thread first and call keyword on it. And then we can find usages of this placeholder. And we can use instead just the basic value placeholder and then wrap it in this formatting placeholder. So this will give us less duplication, and you have placeholders that nest and compose very neatly. Perfect. Let's just do the same one with this number one. And then we can remove both of these placeholders because we're no longer using them. Things are still working. Once again, you can see the counter actions just going amok over here. We really should implement some unload action to stop that, but that's for another episode. So next up, we can remove this function. We can remove this function, and then we can remove this function, and we can remove this function. So this is, I would say, the highlight of the episode, just removing a bunch of code. And we can even remove the closure walk require on top here. This is pretty cool. We've now ported the entire application over to using Nexus. Let's make another commit. Now, actually, I want to remove this old individual action implementations that we don't need anymore. We have one here as well, and there's the last one in the timer. There we go. Now we can commit. Just very briefly look at these diffs. Dispatch actions with Nexus. Nexus also has some development tooling that we can add, which will display actions in Dataspex. We'll get into the dev namespace here, add Nexus's action log, and then we have to install some stuff into the Nexus map. We can call inspect actions here, but that's going to return a new Nexus map, so we'll need to make sure to use that one instead of the one that's in the main namespace. And of course, again, the reason we're doing it this way is that we don't want this to happen in production, only during development. That is all we need to inject the Nexus instance. And now when I click here, you can immediately see the action log starting to fill up. Every time you issue an action now, you get an entry in the log, and you can click into it to catch a lot of details about what's going on. So you can see the placeholders, the actual calculated values, and so on and so forth. Pretty cool. Let's make another commit. Debug Nexus actions with Dataspex. I want to do one more thing before we give up. We have this list of views, and then we have this list of render calls, and we have this list of actions that all basically are about the list of views. So I want to put all the details about each view inside each namespace. Let's go to the bottom here and define the counter view, put in the ID in the text, and then link to the render function. And also associate the actions. Because now we can go in here and just refer to it so we don't have details about the counter in the core namespace. And we can also go down to this case here and put an OR around it and then look up the render function, which we can get from ID to view. Look up the current view and render. And if we find a function like that, we'll just call it with state. Otherwise, we'll do the case, and now we can remove the counter from the case, and that's it. Next one up is the temperatures. Temperature names, define a view again, the render function, and the actions, which will just link like so. Temperature view, and we can remove the render call to temperatures from the case down here. For these actions, we'll come back to the actions later. Let's do flights first. Define the view for the flight, link up the render function. Flights view, and then we can remove the flights from the case, the render case. Now it's just a timer to fix. Find the view once again. Timer view. The case is no longer needed. It's only the welcoming message. And now we can fix the actions as well. So instead of doing this, we can just do apply merge and run a keep over the views that keeps the actions from the views that have actions. Much better. Let's just check that things are still working. I can convert temperatures and things are fine and dandy. That cleans things up a little bit. The timer is not working. Why is that? The problem is that the timer doesn't have a render function. Should probably have a render function. We'll link that up here. And still not working. And there's a bunch of errors in the actions. So get time. Okay, so it's not receiving, it's now. I think actually we forgot to update the use of the clock now. So let's check for that and fix those. Yeah, so here's the clock now, fix that. There's another one at the top. Yeah, the onload actions also uses the clock now placeholder. So with those fixes, things should still be working, and it is. Now over here, you can see that the timer is furiously dispatching new actions to advance the clock, and that's fine as long as it's running, but it should really stop doing that when we leave it. But once again, I'll leave that as an exercise for the viewer, which is the lazy way of not doing this. That's what I wanted to achieve in this episode. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me for the 6th UI, which we'll solve shortly. Until then, bye bye.